Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're going to listen to it. Today, I'd like to talk about the city of New York. First off, I will give you a look into the presentation subject structure, and then I will head right into it. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about some basic facts and tell one fun fact that I chose, then tell you something about the history and the city's development, then continue to give you a look into the current environmental issues, and then finish my presentation off with some sites and places. New York City is located on the east coast of the United States and has a population of roughly 8,336,817 people. It has an area of 468.19 square miles, which is split into 5 different boroughs: the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and Staten Island. Now to the nickname. Big Apple has been the nickname for New York City for a long time now. But where does it actually originate from? In the 1920s, the writer John J. Fitzgerald actually overheard 2 stableholders in New York City calling the racetracks, the horsing racetracks, and the city itself Big Apple. He liked the term so much, he took it and wrote it into his next article, and it became very, very famous over the years. It also got assigned Big Apple Corner near where Fitzgerald lived. To the history. I'm going to summarize the history and the development of the city. So it all started in about 1524 when the first explorations were made by Giovanni da Verrazzano, who actually was an Italian who worked in service for the French crown. He sailed the ocean between New Brunswick and Florida, which was a stripe from north to south, and in between that lies the area that is New York City today. Then later in 1525, more explorations by the Spanish resulted in the 1527 made Padrón Real, and it was actually the very first map that was made of the eastern coast of North America by multiple navigators, sailors, and cartographers. After that, not a lot happened that is still relevant for the history today, so I'm going to skip a couple of years and continue with 1609. So in 1609, the area where New York lies today was actually rediscovered by English explorer Henry Hudson, who, fun fact, is also the namesake of the well-known Hudson River that flows through New York. He worked for the Dutch West India Company, which later also claimed part of the land area of New York in 1614 and renamed it New Netherland. Further expansions were then made in 1626 by buying the island Mannahatta from the native Lenapes, and Mannahatta, as you maybe could think, is now Manhattan. It was bought for approximately 60 guilders, and I didn't find an exact number, but you could calculate it to about $24 to $900 now. After that, New Netherland grew and became more and more populated and developed quite fast, but also had its problems with their one leader who was called Stuyvesant, and he started many conflicts, including prohibition or religious matters. Then in 1664, the Dutch time was actually over because the English came and took over the area. They surrendered quickly to the English without violence or a fight, and it was reclaimed and renamed for the first time as New York after their Duke of York. And why they surrendered without a fight was because they knew they couldn't possibly win that fight because they were very weak at that time. After that, the Anglo-Dutch Wars began, and New York was renamed multiple times until 1674, when the English finally reclaimed it and finalized calling it New York. In the next 3 centuries, New York constantly changed in its environment, so I'm also going to summarize the most important facts and events that happened in those years. So in the 18th century, there was a big problem with slavery because in the 1730s, almost half of all households in New York were slave owners. Then in 1776, there was the Big Battle of Long Island, but it's not the big battle, it's just the Battle of Long Island. And actually, the Americans lost, and the British took the city for military and political base of operations for some time, but luckily for the Americans, they later resettled in the Caribbean and in England. Then, in 1795, first attempts were made to abolish slavery, which freed later generations of slaves, but still left thousands enslaved. And it wasn't until actually 1827 when total abolition in slavery was law in New York City. Then, in the 19th century, there was a huge population growth from about 60,000 to almost 3.43 million people. So the land expanded even more, and national as well as international trading increased their trading status. Also, immigration increased and the city developed more and more. One very important fact is that the majority of the immigration came from Germany and Ireland, so they did form some communities in New York City. Then in the 20th century, economics and industry evolved, and urban areas grew bigger, and by the 1930s, New York had become the very first megacity with a metropolitan area. After the 1940s, New York experienced an economic boom, so after the Second World War. But social problems increased too. For example, there were the Stonewall riots of 1969 in Manhattan, and they were just a row or a couple of demonstrations led by people of the LGBTQ community as we know it today, and it was a fight for their rights. And that went on from June 28th till July 3rd actually. And it did make a big difference because till now there are contributions in the city for those riots in '69. Then finally in the 90s, changes in law enforcement, economics, including gentrification, showed a decrease of criminal activities. The city was improving, crime was lower, till the traumatic event of the 11th September in 2001, when the unintentional destruction of the Twin Towers, so the World Trade Center, took place. This caused not only big shock for people around the whole world, but it also resulted in another economic downfall for the whole city. Now, one of the last most recent events in New York that's not part of the city's history, but will be, is definitely still the COVID-19 pandemic that affected not only the economy, but the environment. Many people lost their jobs, and tax decreases caused major money deficit and loss, especially for big companies that are a major part of the city itself. Tragically, also a lot of fatalities were caused by the virus, and there are still many new ones every day. Therefore, New York will be and is still suffering under their condition of their present situation. Now, let's continue with my next subject, their environmental issues. Especially in the less wealthy parts, there is a high percentage of crimes such as assault, violent crimes, or for example, also robbery. Some of the most dangerous parts are called the ghettos, which are mainly in the boroughs, the Bronx and Brooklyn. So they're not especially wealthy, and they have a lot of social problems too. And there's also a big presence of hostile gangs. For example, the very well-known Bloods and Crips, which are mainly involved in drug dealing and violent crimes, but also rivalry violence. So they do fight each other, and that can become fatal very fast. Another big problem is homelessness, and it's very high inside of the city in every borough and can be calculated up to about 80,000 people in the city right now due to unemployment, eviction, gentrification, or maybe also as a result of a bad upbringing and home situation. Another big factor is air pollution, which causes not only thousands of yearly hospital admissions, but also fatalities and heart or lung conditions, which is proven due to their industrial areas, their power plants, but also the high amount of traffic. Mentioning traffic, it's not just a factor in the air pollution, but much rather a very dangerous part of the city. There are roughly about 600 accidents per day because of drivers' angry and impatient behavior. And my last environmental issue is gentrification that I slightly talked about before. And as I said before, it results in homelessness, but not only that, these people that are being pushed out of the city because of gentrification, because of rent that is going up permanently, have maybe lived there for generations and are just being neglected by the city and the city's peoples for making a prettier surrounding and making the whole city a little bit more attractive. To finish off my presentation, I will give you a look into the most known and most popular sites and places in New York City. I will start off with the Statue of Liberty that is actually located on Liberty Island in Manhattan and is also known as Lady Liberty. It was a gift from the French to America for their celebration of independence, which most of you also know is celebrated on the 4th of July. She depicts the Roman goddess Libertas, where the name Lady Liberty also comes from, and was finished and opened in 1886. Including the base of the sculpture, its entirety is about 305 feet tall, which can be calculated to 93 meters. She holds a torch in one hand and a tablet in the other, and the meaning of them, I didn't find an exact meaning, but the torch is supposed to light the way or the path to freedom and liberty, and the tablet actually has the Roman numerals of the 4th of July, 1776 engraved in it, which was the day of the Declaration of Independence. Let's go on to my next place, the Empire State Building. It's on 358th Avenue, also in Manhattan, and the name actually originates from New York State's nickname, Empire State. It was built in a very short time for the height of that building, from 1930 to 1931, and was designed by architect William F. Lamb. Up to its antenna, the whole building is 1,250 feet tall, which is 381 meters, and has 120 floors. It was also the biggest building worldwide till 1972. It's made up from mostly business floors and a very interesting observation deck on the 86th floor, and also a 3D cinema on the 2nd floor. That 3D cinema allows you to go on a virtual reality plane ride over the whole city. It also has over 120 million visitors a year, and I haven't been there yet, but I've heard that it's a very long line to get into there. Also, if you booked an appointment or got a ticket, it's always a long time to wait, but I think it's worth it. Let's continue with my next site or place, the Central Park. Located between the Upper East and West Side of Manhattan, was created between 1857 and 1876 with only 350 hectares at the beginning. Now it has about 341 hectares of area. Inside, there's a huge amount of greenland area, buildings such as zoo, a restaurant, multiple restaurants actually, and even a museum. There are lakes and ponds, and surprisingly, a very interesting fact, there are over 275 known bird species there. It also includes pedestrian paths, over 56 miles, plus cyclist paths, and even actual roads. Because it is a big part of the city itself, multiple contributions in the music industry were made, for example in the Rolling Stones' song Miss You or Art Garfunkel's A Heart in New York, to share their personal importance of this place to the whole world. Now let's come to my very last place, the Times Square. It is on the intersection of Broadway and 7th Avenue, and you can't miss it due to all the bright lights and billboards that are spread all over the place. It was originally called Longacre Square until 1904, when the New York Times headquarters moved into the area of Longacre Square and got it renamed, so the head of the New York Times made the mayor rename it as a contribution to the paper itself. It is one of the most visited places by pedestrians, with over 50 million tourists yearly. It has hotels, restaurants, theaters, and also a couple of contributions in film, such as Godzilla in a fight scene or even multiple movies of the Spider-Man franchise. To summarize my whole presentation, I would just like to say that I think New York has a lot of upsides and also a lot of downsides, as every big city has. But in general, I think that New York City has a special and unique side that makes it be uncomparable to other cities around the whole world. And that was the end of my presentation. I hope you liked it, and if you have any questions, just send me an email and I will answer them. Thank you for your time.